Steve Hackett left Genesis in 1977 with nothing more than a brief announcement, right when the band was riding the peak that followed The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. No press conference, no farewell tour, no complete explanation. To the public, it was an almost unbelievable shock. The man who helped shape the very soul of Genesis's guitar sound was voluntarily stepping away from a dream that millions of musicians would sacrifice a lifetime to attain. But behind that seemingly cold decision stood a man who had been compressed inward for far too long. Steve Hackett entered Genesis with a distinct talent: classical guitar influence, two-handed tapping, and music colored by darkness and introspection. Yet, within a collective where the space for creative voice gradually narrowed, he learned how to remain silent. Success arrived quickly, but so did the feeling of standing outside the center. Ideas set aside, compositions yielding their place, and an artist increasingly sensing himself existing like a shadow inside his own band. Few knew that during this same period, Hackett was struggling with depression, identity pressure, and a deep sense of not being fully acknowledged. His music grew more intense, yet his inner life was fracturing piece by piece. As Genesis moved toward the brightness of mass appeal, Hackett chose the opposite turn: solitary, risky, and painful, to preserve the remaining part of himself. Steve Hackett's story is not merely about a musician leaving a legendary band. It is the journey of an artist willing to lose glory to keep his inner voice, willing to endure pain rather than betray himself. And from the very moment he was seen as the one who quit, he began another path, quieter, yet more honest than ever before. Steve Hackett was born on February 12, 1950, in Pimlico, central London. Rows of houses stood close together. Opening the window meant hearing traffic, voices, and the unceasing rhythm of city life. He grew up in the family of Peter and June Hackett, a household not tied to professional art, yet calm enough for music to be present naturally as part of everyday life. Hackett was born one day before Peter Gabriel, two children arriving less than 24 hours apart, passing through childhood in different spaces, then many years later meeting again in the same band. At the time, it was only a coincidence. Later, it appears like a thin thread of connection, quiet yet enduring. Hackett's childhood was not enclosed within London. In the 1950s, his family moved to Vancouver, Canada. The new city opened a different space, wider, brighter, a slower rhythm of life, and unfamiliar surroundings. For a child, it was the first time sensing departure from what was familiar. That period did not last long. The family soon returned to England, largely due to homesickness, especially from his mother. Vancouver became a brief memory, yet enough to plant in Hackett his first feeling of displacement. The return to London happened quietly. There was no clear milestone, only life continuing within familiar surroundings. But that experience of leaving and returning imprinted in Hackett like a change of tempo, stepping out of one structure, then returning to another. That feeling followed him later. And when creative choices repeatedly placed him before the question of staying or moving in another direction. In the Hackett household, music existed through closeness. There was no career direction, no long-term plan, only simple instruments and the habit of listening and playing together. Hackett had a younger brother, John Hackett, who formed an early bond with the flute. The two brothers shared a quiet musical space where ideas were tried in silence rather than displayed. Later, John became a frequent collaborator in his brother's solo career. Before that, he had contributed to composing several early Genesis songs without receiving credit, including Get 'Em Out by Friday and Cuckoo Cocoon. Those contributions formed within the family space and behind the scenes. Music was tried, revised, set aside, then returned to. Ideas gradually grew within the familiarity of people sharing the same rhythm of life before stepping onto the stage. Hackett studied at Sloane Grammar School in Chelsea. Those years passed calmly. Music came to him through the harmonica and recorder, instruments associated more with general education than performance. The first sounds were simple, without glamour. It was not until the age of 12 that the guitar truly entered Hackett's life. At first were single notes, hesitant touches on the strings. 2 years later, he began learning chords and experimenting with combining harmonic progressions. There was no teacher, no curriculum. He listened, tried again, assembled sounds according to his own feeling. And the guitar became a way to explore structure and space rather than a tool for display. Hackett's early influences came from many directions. Classical music, especially Johann Sebastian Bach, gave him a sense of counterpoint and order. Opera, through the voice of Mario Lanza, opened a world where melody carried weight and depth. These sounds arrived early, before rock guitar took the central place in his listening and playing. Alongside that was British blues, with Danny Kirwan, Peter Green, and guitarists who had played in John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Hackett also listened to Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, and King Crimson. From them, he sensed freedom, the ability to expand structure and the spirit of breaking boundaries. Those influences overlapped from the beginning. The guitar gradually became the meeting point of different currents, discipline and spontaneity, classical and modern. Steve Hackett's childhood and early foundation did not map out a clear path, but they quietly accumulated the necessary pieces. When he entered professional musical life, those pieces would find their places, forming a distinct guitar language shaped early and gradually revealed over time. Steve Hackett began his career path in small rehearsal rooms and loosely formed bands. To Canterbury Glass, Heel Pier, and Sarabande were his first working environments. There, rock music was already beginning to show early progressive elements, but what Hackett absorbed most clearly was the rhythm of collective life, playing with others, following song structures, holding the right place at the right moment. This was the phase in which he learned how to function inside a band before thinking about leaving a personal mark. In 1968, Hackett recorded guitar for the track Prologue by Canterbury Glass. The recording was not widely released until decades later, but for him it marked the first time working seriously in a studio. Microphones, headphones, tape machines, and the demand for precision quickly accustomed Hackett to controlling sound. The studio was no longer a place to capture spontaneous inspiration, but a space that required discipline and sustained concentration. In 1970, Hackett joined Quiet World, one of the few bands at the time with a record contract. His brother, John Hackett, played flute in the group, while Steve Hackett handled guitar under the direction of the founder. He did not take part in songwriting. The role was limited, but in return came structured studio working conditions, recording instruments layer by layer, and following fixed schedules, understanding how an album is built from start to release. The album, The Road by Quiet World, was the first time Steve Hackett's name officially appeared on a commercially released product. The album did not bear his personal compositional signature, but it completed an important cycle, from rehearsal room to studio, from recording to the marketplace. When he left the group shortly afterward, Hackett did not carry a fully formed identity, but something more practical, an understanding of how a musical structure operates once it leaves the experimental space. Entering the 1970s, he had playing skills, was accustomed to studio discipline, and understood that if he remained still, everything he had accumulated would stop at the level of serving others. Instead of waiting for an invitation, Hackett chose to open a path himself. In December 1970, a small advertisement appeared in Melody Maker. Hackett described himself as an imaginative guitarist-writer, seeking a band that wanted to move beyond stagnant music forms. Later, he explained that stagnant did not refer to conservatism, but to the feeling that music had become closed, lacking interaction between genres. That short line promised nothing, but clearly set one demand: to work in an open space where the guitar did not merely fill gaps, but had the right to shape structure. Peter Gabriel read the advertisement. At the time, Genesis had just lost Anthony Phillips and were searching for a new guitarist, not only to replace technique but to help redefine the band's musical structure. Gabriel responded, and Hackett was invited to audition. The audition took place under unusual circumstances. Only Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel were present. Mike Rutherford was ill. Years later, Rutherford admitted that if he had been there that day, Hackett might not have been chosen, as the group was still looking for someone closer to Phillips. That absence prevented the audition from being pulled back toward the past. Hackett did not resemble his predecessor, but the way he placed guitar within the flow of the songs opened another direction, convincing enough to keep him. On January 14, 1971, Steve Hackett played his first live show with Genesis at City University, London. There was no formal introduction, no grand announcement. He stepped on stage as a part still being tested, within a band also readjusting after lineup changes. Everything remained open, not yet fixed, and that very incompleteness created space for another choice to exist. Hackett came to Genesis not because he was the clearest solution, but because that moment allowed difference to be accepted. The door opened under incomplete conditions, and he stepped in at the right time, when the band needed a new direction more than a copy of the past. When Nursery Crime began recording, Hackett was present in a state of being both chosen and not yet truly belonging. Genesis were still reassessing their structure after Anthony Phillips's departure. And Hackett was not placed in the role of heir, nor given a new central position. He stood in that space with his guitar and a cautious instinct. If he could not claim space through authority or overpowering personality, he would hold on through structure, by placing each layer of sound exactly where it was needed. This was not a spoken strategy, but a survival reflex of someone entering a collective with its own history. Hackett did not try to change Genesis immediately. He chose first to exist, to listen first, and to let the guitar find its path within a structure still being reshaped. In the musical box, the return of the giant hogweed, or the fountain of Salmaces, Steve Hackett's guitar does not rush forward. It waits in the transitions, holds notes longer than feels safe, stretches the space before the song is forced to change direction. That is a conscious choice. Hackett does not try to make an immediate impression. He tries to ensure that the song cannot return to its previous state once the guitar has passed through. The decision to pre-compose the solo for The Fountain of Salmaces was a quiet but important break from convention. In a rock world where solos are often treated as moments of spontaneous outburst, Hackett approached it as a passage with architecture. Each note was placed in advance, each beat considered. This was not only an aesthetic choice, but a way of protecting himself within a songwriting structure where decision-making power was not in his hands. At the same time, Hackett began reaching toward writing, even without encouragement. For Absent Friends, all the music and half the lyrics, and the pre-chorus of 7 Stones were rare spaces he created for himself. They did not place him in a leading position, but were enough to prove that the guitar was not his final boundary within Genesis. In 1972, the tension no longer remained solely in the music, but gradually shifted into Steve Hackett's inner life. Horizons, a solo guitar piece based on Johann Sebastian Bach, was not meant to display technique. It was more like a quiet marker. recalling the classical discipline Hackett carried with him. The thing that helped him keep balance in a band where songwriting authority was increasingly narrowing toward a few fixed axes. Yet on the very first day entering the studio for Foxtrot, Hackett asked to leave Genesis. That decision did not come from personal conflict, but from a feeling of compression. He felt he was not contributing enough, and that sooner or later he would be pushed outside the orbit forming among the remaining members. It was the first inner failure, realizing that his presence might be only temporary. Then Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford kept Hackett in the band, not through promises, but through a cold professional assessment. They needed the way he placed guitar within song structures. For Hackett, that was a pivot point. Not because all doubts vanished, but because for the first time, his value was confirmed through concrete action. He stayed, but with the awareness that this position would never be secure. Selling England by the pound was the phase when Hackett turned that insecurity into language. In Dancing with the Moonlit Night, tapping and sweep-picking appeared not as tricks, but as tools to expand harmonic space. At that time, those techniques had no names, no representatives, and were not yet considered a direction. Hackett used them because he needed another way to speak, not because he wanted to be ahead of anyone. Firth of Fifth is the greatest paradox of this period. The solo was pre-written by Banks, yet Hackett's interpretation made it one of Genesis's most remembered moments. Here, success did not come from authorship, but from the ability to remain inside limits and still leave a mark. Even after Hackett later left the group, that solo was kept intact, like a structural part that could not be removed. Peter Gabriel once called Selling England by the Pound Hackett's coming-of-age album. Not because he gained power within Genesis, but because he learned how to endure within a system that did not favor him. Many years later, Guitar World looked back and called those early explorations far ahead of their time, tracing influence toward Eddie Van Halen, Brian May, Alex Lifeson, and Steve Rothery. But at that time, Hackett had no concept of being ahead. He felt something more practical. If he did not continually find ways to open more space for his guitar, he would gradually fade within the very band he was helping to shape. The period of the Lamb made the studio no longer a place where everyone pulled in a single direction. Within the vast structure of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Steve Hackett's contributions appeared in fragments. The discrete vocal melody of Cuckoo Cocoon, the emotionally leading guitar in Hairless Heart, and the co-writing of It with Tony Banks. These were personal moments inside a system already tightly defined in advance. Hackett mentioned The Lamia and Fly on a Windshield as sections he particularly loved. Yet the overarching feeling remained one of compression, working a lot, holding little decision-making power. After The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Peter Gabriel left Genesis. The band was forced to restructure, not only in the position of lead vocals, but also in the mechanism of authorship. A trick of the tail marked the shift from collective credit to individual songwriting credits, an adjustment that reflected the internal balance of composition within the group. For Steve Hackett, the consequence became fairly clear. He co-wrote only 3 of the 8 tracks. That narrowing happened quietly, without public conflict, but enough to place him outside the center of decision-making. These limits continued into Wind and Wuthering. Hackett's role by then was almost fixed. Steady presence, effective contribution, but little room to expand structures in his own direction. On October 8, 1977, he announced his decision to leave Genesis. The reason was stated briefly, without attack. I needed autonomy. Not because of a lack of success, but because there was no longer space to try things that had not yet been permitted. Throughout his time in Genesis, Steve Hackett was the only member who did not sing. He was present through the guitar, speaking in sound rather than words, and often avoiding direct confrontation. When the band entered a phase that required personalities ready to argue, lead, and occupy space, that way of existing became difficult to maintain. Not because Hackett had become lesser, but because he was different in approach. Leaving Genesis while the band stood at a commercial peak was a decision filled with trade-offs. Hackett did not step away to escape success, but to avoid being permanently defined by that very success. He left in an unfinished state, not yet failure, not fully complete, carrying the sense that a part of his person and music had not yet been fully used. After leaving Genesis, Hackett did not choose rupture. He did not deny the past, nor seek to confront it. He returned to daily working rhythms, writing, recording, playing, and deciding for himself whether to move slowly or quickly. For Hackett, autonomy was not a grand declaration, but the ability to control each small step in musical labor. From there, his solo career did not operate as a straight line. It formed through repeating cycles, opening a new direction, experimenting within his own limits, adjusting when necessary, then continuing to work. Not every phase moved forward clearly, but it rarely stopped, a persistent rhythm of existence, sustained by discipline and personal choice. The first cycle began while the echo of Genesis was still very close. A Voyage of the Acolyte was recorded by Hackett more as a transition than a sharp break. He invited familiar figures, Phil Collins, Mike Rutherford, and Sally Oldfield. The music still carried dramatic qualities and familiar prog structures, but the position had changed. The guitar stood at the center. Hackett wrote and recorded with a feeling of both release and cautious exploration. He tested how far he could go without a collective structure shielding him from behind. The album did not create a major explosion, but it gave Hackett an important confirmation. He could stand alone, and the work could continue. Soon after, Hackett deliberately turned toward less safe directions. Please Don't Touch and Spectral Mornings showed him expanding personal space, more flexible structures, the guitar not only leading but also creating foundation and breathing room. He allowed himself to try multiple roles within a single piece. Every day became a familiar anchor, not because it represented the entirety of who he was, but because it proved Hackett could write accessible melodies while still keeping his own voice. This was the phase when he accepted aesthetic risk in order to preserve decision-making authority. Entering the early 1980s, Steve Hackett was working in a context that had changed. Prog rock was no longer at the center, and the market favored tighter, more direct structures. Hackett did not resist the trend, but neither did he dissolve into it. With Cured and Highly Strung, he tried adjusting his language, bringing vocals forward, shortening forms, testing the limits of survival within the new environment. Not every experiment was convincing, but this period helped him clearly define what he did not want to become. In the mid-1980s, Hackett faced a more concrete gap: the American market. After many years of steady but dispersed work, he chose a strategic step. Hackett collaborated with Steve Howe to form GTR, a project designed to move directly into the American rock mainstream. The album GTR, 1986, brought results Hackett had never experienced before. The record reached number 11 on the Billboard 200, and the single When the Heart Rules the Mind climbed to number 14 on the Hot 100, the highest American chart peak of his career. Hackett entered a different working rhythm: radio, media, dense promotional schedules. Success appeared clearly and quickly, yet here, the limits surfaced. GTR operated according to American market logic: tight management, centralized financial decisions, constant commercial pressure. Hackett realized that autonomy, the very thing he had left Genesis to seek, was again narrowing. Disagreements over finances and management were not resolved. Hackett left GTR, and the project ended soon after. The success came fast but did not last. After this turn, Hackett adjusted his working pace. A momentum, 1988, emerged in what he described as a therapeutic, cathartic state. The album was not meant to assert position or continue chasing mainstream success, but to process what had just passed. The guitar returned to its role as a reflection of personal experience, not a tool for conquering charts. From the late 1980s into the early 1990s, Hackett entered a quieter cycle. He withdrew from the pressure of positioning before a wide public, focusing on personal discipline and a steady work rhythm. Bay of Kings, Till We Have Faces, and projects of the same period opened private spaces. Classical guitar, instrumental music, structures not dependent on songs. Success in this phase was not measured by numbers, but by the fact that he continued to work consistently. That cycle laid the foundation for a durable turn. From the late 1990s onward, Hackett entered a phase of synthesis. He did not avoid Genesis, but neither did he let the past dominate. Darktown, Out of the Tunnel's Mouth, and Beyond the Shrouded Horizon showed a language with enough distance to use history as material. Prog, classical, world music, and then rock blended more naturally. Hackett slowed down in order to go further. Parallel to the studio was the stage. When Hackett returned to performing Genesis works, he did not approach them through nostalgia. Genesis Revisited allowed him to place his guitar back into familiar structures from a different position, without power tension, without role limitations. The old music was played again with a calmness that had not existed before. Viewing Steve Hackett's entire solo career as a series of cycles reveals a consistent logic. Open up, experiment, narrow to maintain balance. There is no star-style breakthrough, but also no disappearance. Hackett accepts moving slowly in order to maintain long-term autonomy. At an age when many artists of his generation have stopped, Hackett continues to write, record, and tour at his own pace. Not to prove anything, but because this is how he exists in music. His solo career is not a story of surpassing Genesis, but a journey of learning how to live and work outside a large structure, through discipline, patience, and labor sustained across many cycles. When the trajectory of his career had gradually stabilized, the private life of Steve Hackett did not appear as an independent, parallel line, but as a quiet, underlying layer, continuously influencing how he worked and how he held himself within music. Hackett's intimate relationships were rarely told as separate stories. They existed in the gaps, revealing themselves only through subtle shifts in daily rhythm, in inner tension, and in decisions not easily reversed. In 1972, Steve Hackett married Ellen Buss, precisely as he had just entered Genesis and begun adjusting to a collective structure more complex than anything he had experienced before. 2 years later, their son Oliver was born. Yet in that same year, 1974, the marriage closed. Hackett did not speak of this break as an isolated event, nor allow it to become a public story. It existed more discreetly, like a displacement in everyday rhythm, a sense of lacking support at a time when work demanded almost absolute concentration. That period coincided with Genesis writing and recording The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Looking back, Hackett described the working atmosphere in measured terms. Each person carrying a separate agenda, priorities no longer aligned, private lives beginning to enter the studio. In that account, he implied that the one going through divorce was himself. The pain was not transformed into lyrics nor explained. It existed as a dispersing force, exposing the feeling of being compressed, both in private life and within a collective structure already operating too tightly. By 1981, Hackett entered another phase when he married Kim Poor, a painter and jewelry artist. This relationship brought a more stable rhythm of life. Kim was not only a partner, but gradually became a familiar part of his creative world. An album covers she designed did not aim for strong visual impact, but reflected a close working space where music and private life operated in parallel without needing separation. For many years, that marriage functioned as a point of support. Music was made within a family context. Major and minor decisions unfolded in private space without the need for public explanation. Yet that very closeness, when it broke, carried more complex consequences. In 2007, Hackett and Kim Poor divorced. Afterward, Kim Poor filed suit, claiming she was co-owner of Steve Hackett Limited, the entity receiving future royalty income. What began as a personal separation quickly shifted into a dispute over control. The following years became a heavy period, not because inspiration had run dry, but because life's rhythm was suspended. Hackett continued writing and preparing work, but his ability to bring it into the open was restrained by legal ties. Autonomy, something he had always regarded as core, once again became something to wait for. The case only closed when the two sides reached a settlement in 2010. For Hackett, it was not simply the end of a dispute, but the reclaiming of the right to continue living and working at his own pace. Soon after that period, his personal life moved into another state. In June 2011, Hackett married Jo Hackett. This relationship did not carry the ambition to shape or manage. Jo is a lyricist, contributing to some of his songs, but her presence is more companionship than structure. No need for control, no boundaries of power. Simply two people existing within the same working rhythm. Hackett's family, from then on, expanded in a different way. Amanda Lehman, Jo's sister, gradually became a stable part of recordings and tours. This presence was not a temporary addition, but formed a durable, collaborative network. For Hackett, this became a new form of family, not bound by traditional roles, not creating pressure outside music, existing simply so that the work could continue. At present, Steve Hackett does not live with a final chapter mindset, nor does he drag the past behind every step. He works steadily according to a rhythm that has settled, writing, recording, rehearsing, touring, then returning to the studio. No haste, no need to prove. The work continues because that is how he maintains balance, a habit formed through many years of self-adjustment. The music is carefully selected, prog rock as the main axis, interwoven with classical elements, world music, and instrumental structures less dependent on song form. The guitar no longer carries the pressure of being ahead or needing to demonstrate influence. It functions as a working tool that has matured enough not to require attention. On stage, Hackett maintains two parallel streams, solo works and Genesis material. Till he neither avoids the past nor allows it to occupy the entire narrative. When performing familiar structures again, he approaches them from another position, without role limitations, without power tension. What once caused unease is placed back within calm. His private life is closely tied to that working rhythm. Family does not interfere with professional decisions nor demand trade-offs. It exists as a stable space so the work can continue. Long-term collaborators form a familiar working circle, understanding each other well enough not to need explanations, flexible enough to change when necessary. Hackett does not close his story with a peak or a summary. His path is a process of continual adjustment, leaving when at the center, staying when the lights shift, always prioritizing the ability to keep working over holding a fixed position. He entered Genesis when he did not yet belong and left when success was still ahead. The life that followed was not about surpassing the past, but learning how to exist outside large structures without losing himself. And he does not pursue speed or validation. He chooses to move slowly, accepting quiet phases as long as the work does not break. If anything remains, it is the ability to stay with music long enough, without noise, without closure. Steve Hackett exists within that very process, and that persistence is his clearest mark.